And welcome to Straight Up with Marc Patrone. I am your host. Well, reaction has been swift and harsh to the Supreme Court ruling, which has struck down mandatory sentences for those possessing child pornography. Canada's highest court has ruled the 1-year mandatory minimum jail sentences for possessing child porn is unconstitutional. In a 5-4 vote, the court said the mandatory sentence is a violation of the Charter's protection against cruel and unusual punishment, not for the victim, but for the perpetrators. The court says the mandatory sentences also remove a judge's discretion to impose sentences other than imprisonment when appropriate. But under what circumstances would you hand a child predator less than a year in prison? Conservative justice critic Larry Brock lambasted the decision with this post. Today's decision by the Supreme Court finding that at least 1 year in jail for accessing and possessing child sexual abuse material is cruel and unusual punishment and grossly disproportionate is a disgusting and cruel insult to victims of these heinous crimes. Some fear this may be a move to gradually legalizing child pornography and possibly even pedophilia. On the economic front, the Bank of Canada is admitting what many in Canada have long suspected, that the country is in recession. Stats Canada reports Canada's economy shrank by 0.3% in August. With all the struggles facing Canadians as far as the cost of living and unemployment goes, the governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, says Canadians can expect even lower standards of living in the months ahead.
Unless something else changes, our incomes will be lower than they otherwise would have been. So, I think what's most concerning is that unless we change some other things, our standard of living as a country, Canadians, is going to be lower than it otherwise would have been.
Well, that will be no surprise, especially to the growing number of unemployed younger Canadians who have borne the brunt of the economic downturn since the Liberals got into power. The unemployment rate among 18 to 35-year-olds is double the national average. The dream of home ownership has all but disappeared. The Liberals have called on young people to make even more sacrifices, but Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre says young people are tired of going without.
He let the truth out of the bag. He said young people are going to have to make more sacrifices. More sacrifices. Now, no more Mr. Carney, the young people in this room and across this country have already sacrificed enough. You've sacrificed home ownership after they doubled the cost of buying a home. You've sacrificed your nutrition and health after Liberal food inflation drove up the costs at the grocery store. You sacrificed your paycheck at the altar of high Liberal income taxes. You sacrificed even your job to employment killing, taxes, red tape, and temporary foreign worker programs.
Meantime, in South Korea, Prime Minister Carney met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and came away empty-handed as far as trade or tariff relief goes. But Carney has been invited to China for a future visit, and he says that relations with that country have turned the corner.
We now have a turning point in the relationship, a turning point that creates opportunities for Canadian families, for Canadian businesses, and Canadian workers, and also creates a path to address current issues. So very pleased with the outcome of the meeting. Our officials are instructed to work at pace on issues moving forward.
Visit to China, Prime Minister, you alluded to an invitation.
An invitation has been extended, and I indicated that I look forward to accepting that invitation. Yes.
Any progress?
Yeah, no progress on tariffs. Last March, China levied a 100% tariff on canola oil, and after meeting with the president, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, well, China agreed to buy 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans between now and January. Well, John Carpay is the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. He joins us from Calgary, and there's a couple of stories that we need to touch on, John. Well, then why don't we start off with the World Health Organization? Apparently, Canada has voted to jump in both feet with essentially allowing the WHO, the WHO, to what? Put us into a position where we would have to enact the rules of an organization that's not even accountable to Canadian taxpayers. Is that correct?
That's exactly it. These international health regulations were deemed to have gone into force September 2025, so a month and a half, 2 months ago. And they would empower the Director General of the World Health Organization to have the discretion to declare a pandemic emergency, so that ceases to become something that we can decide for ourselves, and then to order countries to impose lockdowns, vaccine passports, mask mandates, travel restrictions, mandatory vaccinations, whatever. The silver lining on the cloud is that the World Health Organization has no police force, no army, no court system. They cannot impose their will on anybody. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to the government of each country to decide whether they're going to follow these edicts or not. But it's very ominous that Canada and so many other countries have said, yes, we want to abdicate our sovereignty to unaccountable foreign bureaucrats based in Geneva, Switzerland. We don't want to be accountable to our own voters about our own healthcare policies. We want to abdicate our sovereignty to an international body. That has been the position of Canada, just about every country in the world. The outliers right now are the United States and Argentina and Israel and Italy are 4 countries that are saying no, they're not going to violate their own sovereignty.
Good for them. But I think this allows governments like Canada, who remember the pushback from last time during the pandemic, where you had the Freedom Convoy, you had many Canadians saying, I am not going to comply. I'm not going to be forced to give up my bodily, autonomy for the sake of shots that I'm not comfortable with. And then, of course, the government retaliated by saying, well, you can't get on a plane, you can't get on a train, you can't get on a ferry, for instance. So essentially, the government of Justin Trudeau turned the country into a prison at the time. By abdicating over to the WHO, they can always say, well, it's not us, it's those guys over there just going along with it, just going along to get along. I think that's one of the reasons why they're doing it. They can try to blame the other guys, right?
That's the biggest problem with it, right? Because at the end of the day, the World Health Organization cannot force Canada. They couldn't even enforce Luxembourg or Liechtenstein to comply with anything. They've got no army, no police force. But the problem is exactly that if because of these international health regulations, the next time that our masters, the tyrants, want to impose tyranny on us and violate our fundamental human rights and charter freedoms, violate our freedom of association, travel, mobility, bodily autonomy, freedoms of expression, association, peaceful assembly, their political soundbite to last time around, there was a heavy emphasis on, if you disagree with us, you are an anti-science Neanderthal and you don't care if people die. Next time around, they will probably still be saying, if you disagree with us, you're an anti-science Neanderthal and you don't care if people die. And we have no choice. We've signed on. We have to honor our international obligations. And for us to not impose lockdowns would be illegal because we are signatories to the World Health Organization. So that's going to be the political tactic next time around. So that's why this is worrisome. And Canadians should contact their member of parliament and say, respect Canadian sovereignty, respect democracy. Democracy is a principle of it's a constitutional principle that is there to see to it that Canadians have a say in the laws that we live under. That's what democracy is all about, is that you have a say And you might be on the losing side of an election, and you might dislike a lot of the laws, but you do have a say, might not be a big one, but you have a say in the laws that we are going to live under. That's democracy. And that's part and parcel with sovereignty, that we Canadians make laws for Canada. That's not done by foreigners. And so with the World Health Organization, international health regulations, we're violating both sovereignty and democracy by handing over power to unelected bureaucrats in Geneva. And it's very ironic that this is coming from a government that will scream and shout and light its hair on fire every time that President Trump talks about Canada becoming a 51st state. They will thump their chests and talk about Canadian sovereignty. But yet these same people want to give over Canadian sovereignty to unelected, unaccountable international body.
Now, does Canada have any recourse in terms of, say, a future government? We know where the Carney government stands and where the Justin Trudeau government stood before him. But one day there's going to be a change, a real change in government, not just a change in the guy at the top and not really much of a change at all. But can Canada, a future government, say, you know what, we're out. We're not going to be part of this?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They could do that in two ways. They could do that more formally and withdraw from the World Health Organization, or simply inform the World Health Organization that we reject these regulations. We're not going to abide by them. They can do that formally or informally, practically. If 3 months from now or 3 years from now or 30 years from now, if the Director General of the WHO declares a pandemic emergency, whichever government is in power in Canada at that time can simply say, oh yeah, we're not complying. We will listen to what you have to say. We'll take it under advisement and we will proceed as we deem best. Thank you very much. And that's it. And there's nothing that the World Health Organization can do about it. The other interesting twist is that the Alberta government is introducing legislation that says that Alberta is not going to comply with international treaties that impede on provincial jurisdiction, very similar to legislation that Quebec already has had on the books for the past 25 years. Healthcare, according to Canada's constitution, is exclusively provincial. It's not even shared. Healthcare is provincial, full stop. So Quebec and Alberta are two provinces that could say, well, you know what, unless Alberta, unless Quebec, unless we sign on to this, we're not going to have the federal government dictating healthcare when it is a provincial responsibility, not federal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what Quebec is going to do, but I'm pretty sure that Alberta would be pretty adamant that no, we're not going to be told what to do by the World Health Organization, which has largely been discredited since the pandemic. I mean, since that whole fiasco, when people really found out more about this organization, the power they have, and heard what some of the things that they were pushing, I think the level of credibility they have, the level of trust that they have amongst many people outside, like not only in Canada, but the United States and elsewhere, is rock bottom. I think, who trusts these guys anymore, John?
Well, the tyrants who want to take away our rights and freedoms, they like the World Health Organization as a tool to help them to accomplish that purpose. Tyrants never take away rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext. And so a great excuse for turning us into slaves and taking away our charter rights and freedoms is to say, oh, we've got this deadly virus and, the World Health Organization has declared a pandemic emergency. And so we got to lock you down and make sure you can't travel and make sure that you get injected with whatever that we want you to get injected with. And it's a pretext and an excuse. The other important point is we can cooperate with other countries on fighting a virus, on environmental protection, on trade, we can cooperate with other countries in the world, and we should, without giving up our sovereignty to a supranational body And this is something people lose sight of. They think, well, if you're not going to obey the World Health Organization, then you're being a bad world citizen. Well, that's not true at all. We can and we do have all kinds of different relationships, economic, trade, cultural, healthcare. We've got all kinds of great relationships with other countries, and we should cooperate with other countries, but we can do that without giving up our sovereignty.
Let's talk about 3 particular bills, possibly a 4th if you include the Online Harms Act, that you have opposed on the grounds that if we don't oppose these bills, we're going to be a police state by Christmas, or under an authoritarian government. I mean, look at what's going on in the UK. I mean, how stunning is some of that, where you see people being imprisoned over Facebook posts, for opposing immigration policies. But you're saying we're going down the same road, courtesy of 3 specific bills, right? That would be a C2, C8, and C9. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, it's combined together, and the Online Streaming Act that gives the Canadian radio televisions, the CRTC has authority, control over the internet to decide on Canadian content. So if you look at the previous bills, then you add in Bill C2, which in a nutshell will authorize Canada Post to open letter mail without a warrant, which will make it illegal to use cash in amounts greater than $10,000, which will create a brand new Authorized Access to Information Act, which would give federal government officials, not just police, all kinds of authority to do warrantless searches on your computers and cell phones. So you have a vast expansion of the surveillance powers of the state, the search powers of the state to search and to demand information without a warrant, for the government to demand from telecommunications companies that they turn over their subscriber lists and IP addresses. So that's Bill C2. It's called the Strong Borders Act. It should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. Next, we got C8, which is the Cybersecurity Act, which would actually provides, if passed in current form, it will give federal cabinet ministers the power to kick Canadians off the internet on the pretext of there being a threat to Canada's telecommunications system. But the minister has practically unfettered discretion to determine what constitutes a threat. And so these are the same people that froze our bank accounts, that violated our rights and freedoms during lockdowns. They get to decide what's a threat. And then they actually, if they kick you off the internet, they can target individual Canadians and say, your phone is cut off. You can't use your phone anymore. You can't use your computer anymore. They can make that order secret so that you're not allowed to talk about it to your friends. And then your only recourse is to try to take it to court, which you can't do unless you've got a spare $100,000 kicking around that's available, spare spending money on litigation for a court process that would take 2 or 3 years that you're not guaranteed to win. So that's Bill C8, gives federal cabinet ministers the power to kick Canadians off the internet. Bill C9 is the Combating Hate Act, and that is going to unleash a new wave of hate speech prosecutions against Canadians by getting rid of a current provision that requires the Attorney General to provide permission for a hate speech prosecution to proceed. So it's not just at the discretion of local police, local prosecutors to decide what they feel might be hateful. So there's kind of a sober second thought review process. So to date, even though these laws have been on the books for decades, we've had very few hate speech prosecutions in Canada. If Bill C9 passes, we're going to see a lot more prosecutions.
Well, we already have a criminal code provision, right, for inciting hatred. And I can just distinctly remember hearing and watching some of the committee hearings about this, and the questions was always asked, to the minister, why do we need this extra law? Why the need for that? And I think his answer was, well, so we could charge them under 2 different laws. We could really go after them. It doesn't make, that was his excuse. That was his reason for it. So we could really go clamp down on this sort of thing. I mean, as far as I could see, the current act on the books, as far as inciting hate goes, has been doing its job fine for decades. And nobody's had a real problem with it, except maybe with the way it's enforced. Some people seem to get away with a lot more hatred towards their fellow man and woman than other people. If you look at, for instance, some of the things that were said during the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas protests that we saw time and time again, just hate-filled, hate-fueled attacks on an identifiable group of people. Very few people were charged, if any, under the Provincial Act. Isn't that true? I mean, it's just the way it was enforced.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And then you've got, social conservative activists like Bill Whatcott, who he and some friends dress up as green during the Toronto Pride Parade. They dressed up as green gay zombies, and they handed out a pamphlet that talked about some of the diseases that you could get from certain sexual activities. And yeah, it was hard hitting. I could see why his literature was offensive. Like, he gets charged with hate speech for, distributing socially conservative flyers during the gay pride parade in Toronto. And then, as you said, you have people with very hateful but here's the problem. It's an emotion, right? Like, you could listen to it. You and I could listen to the same person saying the same thing, and you could say, oh, that's really hateful. And I could say, nah, it's just an opinion. And vice versa. I could listen to something and say, oh, do you hear the hate? And you could say, no, it's just an opinion. So this is the problem. And Bill C-9, Combating Hate Act, it's going to, if it's passed in current form, we're going to see a lot more Canadians prosecuted over their speech. It also gives judges the power to severely increase penalties. If the judge feels that hate was part of the motivation in the commission of a crime, then maximum penalty of 2 years can become a maximum penalty of 5 years. Maximum 5 can become maximum 10. Maximum 10 can become maximum 14. Maximum penalty of 14 years can become life in prison if the judge feels that hate was involved in the commission of an offense. So that too is quite worrisome. That you see these very draconian penalties based on an emotion.
And it's really about shutting people up. I mean, let's face facts here. The government doesn't like certain opinions. They don't like those opinions shared. They saw what happened during the pandemic when people started sharing opinions about the pandemic itself and the lockdowns and these draconian measures that were brought in supposedly for our health. And the government wants to shut that down. Whatever, anything that they don't like, they want to shut it down. And of course, the other side that's very troubling is, just because you find something offensive doesn't mean it should be illegal. There's stuff that I find offensive. I've seen it. Just got to, turn the page and find something else to look at. But my concern is that they'll turn that into a crime. You offend somebody, well, you've committed a crime. I mean, I offend people all the time. So that's my problem.
Well, tied in with that, we've got the potential reintroduction of the Online Harms Act, which is Bill C-63. It died on the order paper in April of 2025 when the election was called. It was on track to get through. I mean, the Bloc and the NDP were both supporting it. So this bill, the Online Harms Act, if reintroduced, would give new powers to the Canadian Human Rights Commission to prosecute non-criminal offensive speech. And this is also a big nightmare because they think that because it's not criminal, it's not a big deal. And so they can prosecute Canadians over offensive speech. But the problem is the penalty is up to $50,000 payable to the federal government, up to $20,000 payable to a complainant who felt offended by the speech. And if you choose to fight it, if you retain counsel, you'll be out of pocket tens of thousands of dollars in legal bills. So that's the Online Harms Act. You won't have a criminal record. You'll just be out of pocket a lot of money, and you'll have this non-criminal prosecution hanging over your head for years. The Online Harms Act also has had a provision in there that a judge could place you under house arrest, make you respect a curfew, and wear an ankle bracelet if he believes that you might commit a speech crime in future. And I kid you not, this is Minority Report.
Minority Report.
Somebody who's not been charged with an offense and has not been convicted of an offense could be placed under house arrest by a judge based on someone's fear that they might commit a hate speech offense in future. That's in Bill C-63. Last but not least, or again, the Online Harms Act, it'll have a different bill number if it's reintroduced, is the provision giving the federal cabinet the power to write regulations that govern internet content without any input from Parliament. And that would be enforced by a Digital Safety Commission that can hand out very big fines to any company that is not kicking the wrong speech off of its platform. So Canadians need to contact their MP today, tomorrow, this week, and say, vote against bills C2, C8, C9. Do not bring back the Online Harms Act. And we've got to have, you have to speak up. You know, it's not good enough to complain only to your family members.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no good to self-censor either. It's just that doesn't work. Anyway, how do people support the Justice Center?
You can go to our website, www.jccf.ca. So that's Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca. Sign up for our email newsletter. If you wish to donate, we depend entirely on voluntary donations from Canadians to defend freedom in Canada. And we're a registered charity. We issue official tax receipts. So you're welcome to donate online and sign up for our free newsletter.
Great. John Carpay, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.